Hey friends, just popping in before we start this video to tell you about my newest project, Delusion Media. I love making content on YouTube, and I think there is so much opportunity to grow your business and your personal brand here on YouTube, yes, even in 2023. So I invite you to join me over on the Delusion Media YouTube channel or on delusionmedia.co to get the info you need to create a thriving YouTube channel today. Now let's get to the video. So I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the housing shortage in the United States is worse than it's ever been. We're about 3 million homes short of the demand from home buyers, and this is due in part to COVID supply chain issues. I know I've personally had contractors come into my home to give me estimates on work here that were eye-watering. And they say that supply costs have increased by like 30% since the start of COVID. Not to mention the delays in getting the actual supplies once you order them. The lack of housing supply is also due in part to a slowdown of building after the 2008 recession. Workers found other jobs outside of construction during that time and then never came back to the industry. And millennials, the largest generation, started buying houses since then. Especially with unemployment as low as it is right now, there's a huge demand for construction workers, and they just can't keep up with building houses at the pace necessary to fill demand. Another problem, overly restrictive zoning laws throughout the country which don't allow you to buy a piece of land and build, for example, multiple townhouses on the land and divide it up. You have to build one house with a big giant yard. So the market needs smaller homes that first-time home buyers can actually afford, but regulations get in the way of that. And then there's the private equity firms buying up mass amounts of apartments and single-family homes, cutting costs and upping rents and then selling them at a profit. Not to mention the smaller house flippers who buy fixer-uppers, flip them by purchasing shoddy materials and cutting major corners that the new owners will only discover after they purchase the homes. Believe me, I've seen the TikToks. Basically, housing is a playground for the wealthy to grow their wealth at the expense of the rest of the population desperately in need of affordable housing. And it's basically allowed to grow unfettered by any real regulation because wealthy people have money and our politicians are often either landlords themselves or they're easily bought out by them. How did we get here? Who's to blame? Let's talk about it. Roll the intro. Let me take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Factor. I hate cooking. I don't want to do it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about what I'm going to put in my body. I just want it to magically appear for me. But I also want to be able to eat it and not feel like crap afterwards. I've actually been thinking a lot about glucose and learning about it and the way it interacts with your body and how to keep it balanced because it just makes me feel so much better. And I want to do all this while also I hate cooking. Do you see my dilemma? And this is why I keep partnering with Factor over and over because they cook for me and their food is delicious and it just magically appears on my doorstep, fresh, never frozen, and I don't have to do anything other than heat it up. When I'm busy delving into my research to bring you these high quality videos, the last thing that I want to do is cook. And I genuinely love Factor food, okay? It is tasty as hell. I love that there's no prep and no mess to clean up. I just pop it in the microwave, beep bop boop, and it's done. Factor meals arrive pre-prepared and ready to eat in 2 minutes. So I get to eat food I know is fresh and healthy, but Factor also offers a really great variety with a rotating weekly menu of 25+ meal options. The fact that I don't have to cook this meal, I cannot stress to you how much I love this for me. This is the creamy Parmesan chicken with broccoli and tomatoes, and it is, The broccoli is still tender crisp. I don't know how they do it. Factor has become my go-to lunch or dinner solution when I'm juggling a million things throughout my day and I don't have time to cook. They also have really delicious smoothies that are so handy if I need to head out the door, but I know I'm not gonna have time to get food before I get home. They have a variety of meal plans to choose from, including keto, vegan, vegetarian, and protein plus meals on a rotating menu each week. Factor is now owned by HelloFresh, so with both brands, I really enjoy the flexibility of being able to cook conveniently with HelloFresh or grab and go with Factor. Love this for me. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code Leeja50 to get 50% off your first box. Thanks, Factor. So the issue is that there aren't enough available properties either to rent or purchase affordably. But who's to blame? Well, it's not super cut and dry. There's a lot of actors at play, but I looked into a few of the culprits. The biggest ones that I found appear to be Airbnb and short-term rentals, private equity firms and other institutional buyers who've been snatching up apartments and single-family rentals since the 2008 recession to the detriment of pretty much everyone, and then finally politicians, who will never pass any laws to meaningfully regulate this on a national level. Let's start with short-term rentals, specifically Airbnb. Full disclosure, I have an Airbnb listing. The house that I purchased in 2021, this very one, is a duplex, and I bought it with the intention of renting half of it to help pay for my mortgage. Frankly, the only way I was able to afford this home was if I rented out half of it to pay for half my mortgage. And in fact, it made more economic sense for me to do it this way, because if you have some rental income coming in to cover half the mortgage, you're probably paying less money for a larger house than you would be if you bought a single family home. Like, I took on a greater risk because the overall house cost me more, so I needed to take out a bigger mortgage, but the reward is that my mortgage is smaller than it would be if I had purchased a single family home, because half of it's being paid by rental income. Does that make sense? Okay, so my qualms are not with individual Airbnb rental owners who are often renting out a portion of the home or one additional property to help make ends meet and create generational wealth. God bless, okay? My problem is these investors who pride themselves on owning dozens, sometimes hundreds of rental units and listing them all on Airbnb. And there's a lot of them. Get this hot stat. 1/4 of the hosts on the platform run 2/3 of its listings. Make that math, okay? Search Airbnb on YouTube and you're gonna find 100 different people, usually men who all look the same, telling you how to increase your Airbnb rental portfolio, sometimes without even owning any property at all. And here's my issue, okay? The consequence of this mass ownership, just from an anecdotal user experience, is that the nature of renting on Airbnb has changed, I think, for the worse. My first experiences with Airbnb were on a road trip that I took solo back in 2017. I stayed in people's homes, like in extra rooms that they had, and I met some of the loveliest people. And I saved a ton of money over having stayed in hotels and made some wonderful memories along the way. For example, I stayed in Virginia with a woman named Henry who rented out one bedroom in her house and then spent the rest of her time foraging for mushrooms for local restaurants. And we just hung out and had a bonfire in her backyard. She had a lovely dog. It was a beautiful experience that I still think about fondly. Now, the mass owners of Airbnb and many people who stay in Airbnbs treat this the same as a hotel business. And sometimes worse, based on the Airbnb horror stories I've seen on TikTok of like really disgusting spaces. Because it's no longer someone sharing their home with you, it's some random person who doesn't even live in the community and owns 100 other units, cutting corners wherever possible to make a quick buck. Because truly buying property and then renting it on Airbnb is like the closest thing to a get-rich-quick scheme that exists, and no one's doing much to stop it. But this also means that the people who rent on Airbnb sometimes also treat it like a hotel service, in my experience, with absolutely no respect or understanding that they are staying in someone's home. Like, even if it's a duplex, it's still my home, okay? Not to mention the fact that mass Airbnb ownership and rentals are decimating the rental market and making the availability of long-term rentals dwindle, causing prices to surge because of the demand. And now entire neighborhoods are lost to short-term rentals. An analysis conducted by the Economic Policy Institute, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan American think tank, found that the economic costs of Airbnb likely outweigh the benefits, saying, while the introduction and expansion of Airbnb into cities around the world carries large potential economic benefits and costs, the costs to renters and local jurisdictions likely exceed the benefits to travelers and property owners. This is known as the Airbnb effect, which is very similar to gentrification in that it slowly increases the value of an area to the detriment of the local residents who are then pushed out due to financial constraints. A recent study in the US found that a 1% increase in Airbnb listings leads to a 0.018% increase in rents and a 0.026% increase in house prices. That doesn't sound like a lot, but a lot of communities are experiencing growth of much more than 1% of Airbnb listings, you know what I mean? And now that the housing and rental market is out of control in big cities, thanks in part to Airbnb, property owners, Airbnb owners, are now seeking out more remote destinations or smaller towns like Sedona, Arizona, for example, and doing the same thing now that people all work remotely and can move wherever they want. Sedona actually banned short-term rentals way back in 1995, but then in 2017, an Arizona state law, SB 1350, blocked those curbs. Legislators had pitched the law as an embrace of the new sharing economy and a boon for Arizonans looking into making some extra money by renting out their spare bedrooms, which is quaint, but when the law passed, of course, investors flooded the market. People in Sedona are now living out of their cars or camping on the outskirts of town, and not in the cute van life way, okay, but because they have no other choice. And it's damaging the national forest that surrounds Sedona. Like, do we see the wide-ranging consequences when you prioritize tourism over all else. More tourism means more service industry workers are needed, but those service workers can't afford the housing because of the increase in tourism. Like, there needs to be a balance, okay? This is what regulations are for. In Sedona, 16% of Airbnb rentals are owned by 5 companies, and the city has become the target of professional Airbnb hosts. And that's just one example of what's happening throughout the country. And the more remote that these investors go, the more damage is being done to the local residents and local environment that was not built for the influx of new people who don't give a shit about what's going on locally. They just want to have their bachelor party in Joshua Tree, god damn it. Okay, so Airbnb is making the share of long-term rental availability abysmal, leading to greater competition and therefore increased rent prices for the few remaining long-term rentals. And many of the people amassing short-term rental properties are smaller or individual investors. But then you've also got the big guns who come in extra hot. I'm talking institutional investors and especially private equity firms. So here's how private equity firms work, because I didn't know. So they are firms that manage pooled investment money raised from fund investors. They're not generally open to small investors. Instead, they take investments from companies and funds like hedge funds and insurance companies and then invest that money into businesses. The equity firm then works with the business that they have purchased to make it more valuable so they can turn around and sell the business at a profit. Their whole game is very, very short-sighted. They buy, they pump up the value, then they turn around and they sell it ASAP. Turns out private equity firms love buying up real estate. They will often buy the real estate, flip it, or just hold on to it until the market improves, and then sell it for more, which is exactly what they did during the 2008 financial crisis, which is the origin of a lot of this. So they'll buy large apartment buildings, up the rent, cut the costs, show the increased revenue to potential buyers and say, look how much money this property generates, and then sell it at a ridiculous markup, all while the existing tenants either suffer through awful property management or get pushed out by the rent prices, and usually both, okay? But this isn't just the private equity firm taking cash and buying properties with it. No, they take their cash and their other holdings and use it to obtain credit in the form of giant loans. And where are those loans coming from? Well, a lot of them are coming from Freddie Mac, the publicly traded company with a congressional charter meant to help support home and apartment purchases by buying loans off private lenders. Freddie Mac, which is subsidized by our tax dollars, is giving huge amounts of money to these firms in the form of loans. Its largest loan ever to anyone was in 2017 to private equity firm Greystar for $1.8 billion. Private equity firms account for 85% of the largest 20 deals that Freddie Mac has ever reached, and all of those deals occurred within the last 8 years. And in turn, these loans allow for the further concentration of rental properties in the hands of private equity firms, who then raise rents to increase profits to sell the properties to buy their next properties, and the cycle feeds itself, resulting in rent increases across the country. And despite being a private company created by Congress, the loans from Freddie Mac come with zero protections for renters' rights, quality of the properties, or any protections to ensure for affordable housing. Not to mention the fact that these firms are also buying the types of single-family houses that first-time home buyers and middle-class buyers can actually afford, and they're able to pay more for the houses, and therefore sellers are more willing to sell to them. And then they turn around and raise the rent, and the person who maybe could have bought the home now has to rent it from them instead. So what happens is the rents go up everywhere. The tenants who were living in those now private equity-owned apartments and houses are forced out. New renters move in who can afford the rent and were probably marketed a luxury apartment or home, but are actually paying more for lower quality. And then the people on the lowest rungs of the ladder are all competing with each other for a dwindling share of affordable rental units. One study found that just a 5% increase in rent can lead to thousands more homeless people in a city like New York. And you might be thinking the easy fix is just to regulate what these private equity firms can do, right? Well, yes. You're right, okay? But that would require politicians with the will to do anything like that, and well, this may come as a major shock to you, but turns out politicians are in on the deal. Here are some fun facts for you. At least 238 lawmakers are also landlords. There is no limit to how much they can earn as landlords. For example, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, his in-laws literally own the Empire State Building. In general, members of Congress and their senior staff members are not allowed to earn more than $29,595 in income outside of their federal salary, like as a side gig. However, rental properties are conveniently exempted from these limits, as are certain other earnings, including from stock trades and book deals. I hate that for us. In 2020, 15 lawmakers reported owning at least one property that earned them up to $1 million in rental income. And it's not just elected officials. More than 200 senior congressional staff members reported rental income in 2020. For example, Clark Scanlon, the state director for Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, lists earning $1.2 million to $12 million a year from 6 of his rental properties located in Iowa and California. And if you're like, that's a huge range, that's because members of Congress and their staff are only required to report their earnings in very broad ranges like that, not with any specificity. And this is what happens when politicians are allowed to regulate themselves and their income. I already made a whole video all about how politicians can play the stock market like a fiddle. Turns out they're playing the real estate market as well. A reminder that these are also the politicians who regulate real estate, private equity firms, companies like Airbnb, and everything else that touches the real estate industry, while also making millions. But of course, when you call them out on their insane wealth, they complain about being expected to just give up their riches, as if they didn't volunteer to become a public servant. But the problem is, any real, meaningful regulation to the amounts and types of wealth that Congress people hold would disqualify a large portion of our elected officials from holding office. They're not going to pass laws that are going to kick themselves out of office. And they're not going to pass regulations of the real estate industry that curb short-term rentals or mass ownership of real estate and predatory rental practices because they're actively benefiting from all of it. But in the hypothetical world, where we kick multimillionaires out of office, and we elect a more diverse group of working class people who actually represent our interests and can't be bought out by private equity or their own self-interest, what laws would actually work to create some change? Well, some lawmakers have started looking into it. There are a few things getting in the way of legal change in the real estate market. First, you have outdated and exclusionary zoning laws put in place by existing homeowners, usually, to keep their neighborhoods pristine and not riddled with townhomes or multifamily units, which is often a classist ploy to keep lower income people out, and was used in the past to keep neighborhoods white. You can check out the book The Color of Law to learn more. This means that even where there's a will and a need for multifamily housing, the local regulations prevent it. Some cities are changing the rules to allow accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, to be built onto existing houses. Those new regulations, however, are new, so no one really knows how to work them, and they're hard to navigate, frankly. I've tried. And what do most people want to do with their new ADUs? They want to rent them out on Airbnb. Okay, so it's not really solving the problem. There's the idea of creating incentives to build more rent-controlled apartments, but of course, real estate investors aren't interested in rent control, and they have the money to lobby against any changes like that. In 2018, Blackstone, a private equity fund, spent $7 million to push back against rent control in California alone. The gist of it is that in order to make meaningful change, you gotta create regulations that make it more economically viable to rent long-term as opposed to short-term on Airbnb, and you gotta put a cap on the number of rentals that institutional buyers like private equity firms can own at any one time. This is based on what some lawmakers are proposing, but also based on my experience as an Airbnb host. In order for me to own this home, as I've said, I need half my mortgage to be covered by the rent, and it made more economic sense for me to take on the risk of more debt for a bigger home with the promise that half of it will be paid for by rental income, making my mortgage costs lower than if I had tried to buy a single family home. So I'm paying less for my bigger home than I would be if I got a smaller home. And economically, it doesn't make sense for me to do a long-term rental because during busy season, I can make at least twice as much per month on Airbnb as I would if I rented long-term. And that's a universal thing, that's not just me. And to get people to change, it has to make economic sense for them. We're all trying to survive, and asking people to switch to long-term rentals out of the goodness of their heart won't cut it. Okay? I would love to be in a place where I could just rent long-term. Believe me, it would be a fuck of a lot easier not cleaning bodily fluids off sheets every few days. But I'm not in a financial place to do so right now. I'm working on it, but I am not there. So we need economic incentives, and we need regulations with big enough monetary penalties to create those economic incentives. And there are cities that are doing creative things. For example, back in Sedona, they just launched a pilot program called Rent Local. The city has set aside $240,000 to pay Airbnb hosts to turn their properties back into long-term rentals. The problem with this is that that amount of money barely puts a dent in the problem. They anticipate that they can free up 35 rental units with that money. But in Sedona, they need more like 500 units to handle the housing need that's pushing people to camp in their cars on the outskirts of town. And in the 3 months after the pilot project launched back in August, the city received a total of 3 applications. Clearly not enough of an incentive. In Summit County, Colorado, they have spent $1 million in incentives to convert 74 short-term rental units into long-term rentals. In New York City, they've banned short-term rentals unless they're for 2 people max, and it's a room in a house you live in at the same time. There's a company called Placemate that collaborates with local governments to encourage short-term rental owners to convert their units to long-term rentals, and then helps local workers get placed in the newly converted long-term rental units. They only work in California, Colorado, and Idaho, and they have been able to house 538 people long-term through their efforts. And of course we need a private company like Placemate to come in and do this on a hyper-local level instead of governments or the federal government, God forbid, stepping in and doing anything, because our politicians are so bought out by private interests that it doesn't make economic or political sense for them to vote against real estate giants, especially in conservative states. Because, my friends, Republicans do not care about whether you are housed or not. But also, neither do Democrats. In Minneapolis, where I live, our Democratic mayor is a piece of shit who plows down encampments for unhoused people with no warning, kowtows to big business and to the police, and who regularly gets booed when he tries to speak to activists because everyone knows he's full of shit, and he's a Democrat. So part of me is like, let's elect people who give a shit about housing and let's pass laws that penalize big rental property owners for exclusionary and predatory practices that lead to mass houselessness in the cities where they're snatching up properties. But man, I don't know. I feel pretty cynical about that ever happening. Internationally, in Lisbon, the city that I would like to yeet myself to and get out of this hellish country, they just passed a law banning the creation of more short-term rentals. And yes, okay, I recognize the hypocrisy of what I'm talking about and me wanting to move to a city that has been gentrified beyond belief by tourists and expats. I don't have an excuse for myself. That's beside the point. Okay, here's the problem with these blanket regulations against short-term rentals though, like in New York City or abroad. They are applied equally whether you're a mom and pop rental owner where you're renting out a single unit or a single home, or whether you're a major company who owns hundreds of Airbnb properties, like the 5 companies who own 16% of rental properties in Sedona. Using Airbnb or long-term rental income as a way to make ends meet and pay off your mortgage helps middle-class people. Using it as a way to amass land and wealth is creepy and has a far greater effect on the local economy because it's companies that are run by people who don't even live there, swooping in and buying up property. So we need laws against the quantity of properties one entity can amass, not just regulations around the nature of the individual rental properties. Does that make sense? In October of last year, Representatives Ro Khanna, Katie Porter, and Mark Takano, all from California, introduced a bill in the House called the Stop Wall Street Landlords Act. In the press release for the bill, they said, and I quote, "Since the 2008 housing crash and subsequent foreclosure crisis, increased investor activity in America's housing market has normalized price gouging, excessive fees, and abusive practices while artificially driving up housing prices. As a result, investors last year bought nearly 25% of U.S. single-family homes sold last year, driving up rent prices for American families. The Stop Wall Street Landlords Act works to deter future institutional investments in these properties by imposing a tax on existing and future acquisitions of SFRs, single-family residences. It also prohibits Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and Ginnie Mae from purchasing and securitizing mortgages held by large institutional investors who use debt to buy single-family homes and rent them out for optimal profit." So the Stop Wall Street Landlords Act was introduced in the House and then referred to the House Ways and Means Committee and the Committee on Financial Services for review back in October. Given that the House is run by Republicans now, and private equity has shown a willingness to invest huge sums of money to push back on this kind of legislation, I don't really see this bill or anything like it making it very far. But whether or not there's a political will for the change to happen, the fact remains that the current state of affairs for housing in the United States is severely broken. And I think mass ownership of residential rental properties is largely to blame. Frankly, I think it should be illegal. And I think the people who have amassed dozens or hundreds of Airbnb units and then come on here to YouTube to brag about it, or people who run private equity firms with zero care for the lives they're ruining, should be fucking ashamed of themselves. As should the politicians who are too cowardly to do anything about it. Thank you for watching, and thanks again to Factor for partnering with me on today's video. Reminder to go to factor75.com or click the link below and use code Leeja50 to get 50% off your first box. If you've ever thought of making your own YouTube channel, might I suggest checking out my second channel, Delusion Media, or go to delusionmedia.co to sign up for my newsletter and receive regular tips and tricks for how to create content on YouTube. Thanks to my Patreon supporters, especially my royal patrons, Old Man Pence, Fork McSpoon, LNL, Lita, May Danger, Rachel, and 𝗍𝗓𝗍𝗑, and an extra special thank you to my multi-platinum patron, Brett Piontek. Your support is greatly appreciated, and it makes this channel what it is, so thank you. If you like this video, you might also like my recent video all about why politicians are allowed to play the stock market. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.